People with a diagnosis of severe mental illness are dying between 10 and 20 years before the general population, giving a mortality rate similar to that of the 1950s. We at the Health Support Team are trying to reduce that gap between physical and mental health. What was recognised is that patients are finding it difficult to access physical health care at times, and what we do is try to support that and even bridge the gap between primary care and ourselves.
The patients that come to our clinics have severe and enduring mental illness. So they come to our clinics to have bloods taken for specific medication and to have injections in our depot clinics. We're in an ideal position when we see them to be able to help and support with assessing the physical health needs as well as the mental health needs.
We look at the whole person. We support them to make better choices about their medication, about their healthcare, by providing information about their physical health to GPs, to their consultants and to themselves.
Through doing our physical health clinics, we've been able to identify for some patients that they needed treatment for things such as diabetes, high cholesterol, hypertension, and we've also had one gentleman who we've been able to encourage to change his lifestyle, and he has over the last 12 months lost 3 stone and he attends the gym regularly now.
We've had some very difficult times over the past years, but particularly that last year, and the team have been absolutely great in supporting me to support Duncan and to help us with things like PIP appeals, family difficulties, all sorts. It's been great.
They've been there for us when we needed them. They were there at the right place at the right time. They spoke common sense, it wasn't boring, and it was just nice to be with them. The team have been fantastic, I just want to say a big thank you.
We at the Health Support Team are known as the Happy Team. We enjoy what we do, we're enthusiastic, we have fun and try and make it as enjoyable not only for ourselves but for our patients as well.
The next thing we're going to do is a memory test called the ACE3.
The Memory Assessment Service was set up in order to make assessment and fundamentally diagnosis of people who are thought to have a dementia illness in a growing older population. The team's made up of a team leader, 2 nurses, an assistant practitioner, a support worker and 2 medical secretaries, with support from a consultant psychiatrist. There was a sequin that was introduced 2 years ago which asked for assessment within 6 weeks and diagnosis within 12 weeks of referral. At the time that the sequin was introduced, the team wasn't able to meet that. They looked at the roles of each worker to look at who could be involved in the assessment and whether somebody needed a shorter or longer assessment when they were referred in.
That's a penguin. Okay.
What the team have been able to do is draw on the skills of the assistant practitioner, Kath, who undertakes assessments in her own right, as well as supplementing the assessments that the nursing staff and Alwyn undertake. By doing that, they've been able to increase the number of assessments they've been able to offer. The team have been able to redesign the pathway of people through the service and are now meeting both parts of the sequin. They've worked with the patient experience team in order to comprise a specific assessment feedback form that they give to patients and carers that come with people to the clinic. The team always receive between a 90 and 100% positive feedback.
The second I arrived, all I got was sympathy. People understood that I had a problem. Outside of the hospital grounds, nobody knew I had a problem, which was very frustrating because I was aware that something was different.
Without the support and the common sense here, I don't know what road we'd have gone. They've given us our lives back. That's really how we both feel. The kindness they have shown us has been top-notch.
If I was in charge of picking a team to do what this team has been doing for me, I wouldn't make the slightest change. Every single person would be spot on.
James Lake, I worked on inpatient wards in Homerton and the PQ ward in Homerton and inpatient elderly wards in Newham. Worked as an occupational therapy technical instructor, Band 2, to run groups and make basic assessments and creative groups, and to provide a large amount of patient contact on the wards. PQ unit is an inpatient ward, and the door is locked. It's usually for violent patients who are violent, have a history of violence, or for patients that abscond, for patients that are difficult to treat. For instance, it might require regular forced medication. And
why would they be needing forced medication?
Oh, why? I mean, if it's deemed that you need medication by a psychiatrist, then and you refuse it, that would be deemed that the person is lacking insight and being unwell, and being seen as the only treatment. It is a requirement that they receive the medication, and that would be given through a forced injection.
By restraining them? By
restraining, yeah. They take you by the arm, often be brought to the floor. You'd have your trousers pulled down, and you would be injected with the medication that you're meant to be given.
That sounds the treat. How can someone keep a sense of dignity when they're having their trousers pulled down?
No, there's no dignity in having your trousers pulled down. Your bottom's a sensitive place. And I don't know, for the older generation, that's where you were smacked, so it's a very humiliating thing to have done, I think.
Did you see that happening to elderly people?
Yes.
Really?
Yes.
What, being restrained?
Yes, they're restrained, yeah. If they refuse medication, there has been, although it's denied, although I have heard it discussed in ward rounds, I'm certain that it's been done, they can put a liquid form in cups of tea, which they shouldn't do, but they have been known to do. There'll be antidepressants though.
Oh, yeah. Not like tranquilizers.
No. But once someone came onto the ward, they rarely, they'd leave, but they'd be in and out for the rest of their lives. And I haven't developed a faith in medication. I haven't been, swayed. I don't feel it's been proven to me that these medications work very well at all. An example would be a young adult, an actor, and the psychiatrist didn't know what was wrong with him. He was given doses of medication without a diagnosis, and he had a very bad reaction to it. And anyone can read the medication and see that antipsychotics or whatever he was put on has side effects of mental health problems, and this person had a reaction, and he flew off. He became aggressive. He wanted to escape. He couldn't sit still. He saliva. And the psychiatrist, when I sat in the ward round, said that we've uncovered, a hidden psychosis, and he was in and out for, until I left, stopped working there.
But you feel that reaction was brought on by the medication, not by some underlying hidden psychosis.
The fact that he reacted in such a strong way after being medicated, to me, is not evidence of a hidden psychosis. Should really highlight and should really bring into question what effect the medication is having. I mean, that should be the primary question. That's what's been introduced to him. If someone comes back onto the ward, I think you can consider the treatment a failure, within a short time, and people will be in and out of wards for the rest of their lives, from what I've seen.
But psychiatrists would say that's down to their illness.
Yeah, and even when there's the evidence coming out about the brain damage caused, and someone who's been on medication for a long period having a lighter brain, the damage that has been shown to be caused has been said to be part of the mental illness and nothing to do with the medication. With the treatment of mental illness being linked, having to be legally treated with medication, we're unable to separate mental health from medication. And if the pharmaceutical companies and the manufacturers of the drugs can get away with saying, well, you know, the mental illness caused the brain damage, I think that's criminal.
Yeah.
There's also a culture that is inhuman on the ward. Staff are, on the whole, not allowed to socialise too much, particularly nurses, with, well, they're allowed to, but they're advised not to, because there's, one, the fear of counter-transference, and also there's the idea that if you like someone and you get to socialise with someone, that will affect your diagnosis. So the most evidence for improvement in mental health is socialisation and social therapies, and there isn't that I have, where you know, we sit and spend a long time talking to people and help people in that way, but we are told not to think that we have helped them in any way, that that our communication has done nothing for them. Because there's a fear that the person will form a delusion that they are curing people, which is oversafe. I mean, if you're spending time with someone and you see a positive improvement, I think you can feel, okay, I've done a good job personally, and you know, without getting too overblown. So yeah, so there's minimal contact, and I'll give an example. There's been a couple of wards where I've worked on where the nurses were extremely religious, extremely Christian, majority of the nurses working. And this was in Homerton, and they would not leave the office. They would look at people outside and they looked terrified. There was no contact. They wouldn't be sitting there talking to people. When they had a bit of free time, they weren't walking the ward and talking to these people, because they're people. It's a culture where there is a separation, and someone who is manic, someone who is distressed, I've seen great positive effects of someone talking to someone, taking time with someone, listening, even if it isn't making sense. They need to feel that someone's there, and that person will settle, and they would, you know, there would be no need to restrain. And I think that, from what I've seen, there's a confrontational, authoritarian air that the mental health nurses have. So they force medicate if they don't behave themselves. They punish in senses if they don't behave themselves. A person that you can't approach on a personal level, they're not there to be a person for you. For a person who is in distress, you know, who needs help, who probably needs people, they are not going to get this from the nurses, and the nurses often only step in to enforce medication, to enforce a psychiatrist's orders, and to make the person obey. And if the person doesn't obey, the nurses will, you know, they will force medicate. They will write bad reports, and the person might take longer to come off. They might write a negative diagnosis. I personally believe diagnosis is often a punishment. If you haven't behaved yourself, you can expect a bad diagnosis. And one of the measures for mental health is compliance. The person is complying with medication, the person is complying with treatment, and therefore has insight into their illness. Now, it doesn't matter whether they, you know, how wrong they get it. I mean, there's no any idea of accuracy is a load of rubbish. Any idea that psychiatry is a pure, strict, well understood science is an absolute load of rubbish. That the psychiatrist knows things about you that you would never know yourself, it is rubbish. It takes power away from you, and you know, there are truths in some of the, there are, you know, diagnostics, but on the whole, they don't pinpoint it. They don't know what's wrong with you, and they will force medicate you. Now, you might disagree with that. You might know that this isn't right for you. You might have a fear about the way your reactions to medications. You might know something about the medications. You might not like the way it makes you feel. You might want something to change. Any of that is a sign of ill health. And I've seen plenty of cases of misdiagnosis, and the fact that these people fought against it was detrimental to them. and the doses have increased, and with increasing, with each worsening diagnosis leading, it leads towards schizophrenia, mostly, or bipolar. The medications are incredibly strong. Social therapy has been proven to be one of the best ways of treating people, as has, we don't know why, but good nutrition has been proven to have a very positive impact, positive correlation. You don't know why. You'll have the worst food, you starve in hospitals, people starve to death in hospitals, the food is awful, overcooked without any nutrients in it, just in case they die from a food poisoning instead of feeding them. So yeah, there are lots of problems in it. The psychiatrist will not spend time with you. The psychiatrist will know nothing about you. The psychiatrist will make a diagnosis based on a very short meeting, and he or she has got a lot of people to get through, caseload after caseload after caseload after caseload, and they will make all their diagnoses on the way someone responds within a short time, based on statistics and things like that. Nothing to do with you. It's not patient centered. They will be given drugs that make them overweight, and they cause serious harm. I mean, there's high risks, there's health problems with all of the medications, and they are the first port of call. Traditionally, psychiatric medication used to be the last port of call. Now it is the first and pretty much the only treatment you can expect. If you see a psychologist, they will tell you that they don't have time to go over things. If we were going to have longer together, they would do something. So it doesn't work. It seems to be propping up, the pharmaceutical industry. It's propping up, psychiatrists who make, hundreds of thousands a year, who don't know the clients, don't get to know them, aren't interested in the clients, and I feel have done genuine harm to people, and it's not right. It's not right. I mean, something that works, the whole system is failing people, and you can go into the system to try and fight it, to make a difference to these people, but ultimately they'll be putting on mind-altering medications with strong side effects that I think can contribute to mental health problems. I mean, people have described being on antipsychotics as having the self-awareness of a slug, separated from yourself. And I don't know, imagine a young, beautiful person within a few years, bloated, overweight. The medications make people very hungry, so they'll have a meal, and then they'll go and get a takeaway as well. And they balloon. It's likely, I think, and I think more and more people are speaking out about it, that medications can cause endocrine damage, and endocrine in the liver help you deal with the hormones, and also for weight control, and the damage can be permanent as well.
Yeah, the Parkinson's disease type, the shakes and the tremors,
nerve
and
damage.
When people get that is irreversible.
Yeah.
And that's brought on by the antipsychotic.
Yeah, nerve damage. And what is your brain made out of mostly? It's neurons.
Mm.
And they have similar composition. Most of them have high cholesterol, so it's causing some serious problems in the body. All the medications have side effects, so you have to have medications for the side effects. I mean, anyone who's watched a documentary about mental health has heard this 100 times. Side effects need to be treated with medication, which have side effects, which need treating with medication, which have side effects. It increases the toxic load. They're toxic, these medications. And they don't know what they're doing with them. They're addictive, and they do harm, and they're not even proven to have worked. They have the power of diagnosis, and we believe we're living in a scientific age where things have been proven, and that some people feel that we've moved forward, and that psychiatrists know what they're doing, and the psychiatrists believe they know what they're doing, but it has a very low success rate, so obviously they don't. Another very important thing to note is that psychiatrists get to create diagnoses. They have meetings to create diagnoses where they will apply a medication which was proven to treat one ailment, and they will apply it. And they say, well, we tried it. All human experimentation, and it's a very low success rate. And I have to say, from my personal opinion, I saw very few people get well. It was a case of in and out for the rest of their lives, with a quick tune-up with these things that cause nerve damage, brain damage. Very intelligent people finding it difficult to read. Very intelligent people finding it difficult to even draw, use their hands. Yeah, so this, as I was saying, this guy was with learning, I believe, had learning difficulties. I don't have the power of diagnosis. He was rebellious, he sought to be a character, he was a believer in freedom, and the more the mental health services closed down on him, because the wilder he got. And these were treated, his behaviour got extreme, like he shot himself, which in a way which I feel was in protest, being handled and various things like that. Then he'd scream and he'd, have tantrums and things like that. So increasingly his diagnosis got worse, his medication got more potent, so he'd becoming, dribbling increasingly, more incoherent, and to me apparently more ill, but probably easier to manage when heavily medicated. And ultimately he was put on ECT. I'm sure it's been excused, but it seemed mostly that's because they've tried everything, and this is the last thing that they could, the only thing they hadn't tried. And I was the only one to socialise really with him. I became the only person he would respond to. I almost became like an ambassador, between him and the psychiatrist. But being in my position, I was very little I could do. Didn't have any power. I could see things I didn't like, but I don't have the power of diagnosis. I don't really have the power to say anything. And he was put on ECT. There's no evidence. They don't know how it works.
What was the effect? Well, do you know how many times he had it?
At least 2 or 3 times, and that was just about when I was leaving. I don't know what's happened to him. So all I know is that he was calling my name before, in fear as he was being taken in for the ECT. He was very worried about it. It was very frightening for him. He didn't really know what was going on, and I'm sure ECT hasn't done anything for him. I mean, people that have had ECT, I've seen a young person who was very depressed. He was given ECT, and then he was manically happy, blissfully happy, and then he was soon depressed again. And this was the cycle.
I've heard the same.
Yeah, this is a cycle. It's not a treatment. It wasn't long term. Medication, ECT, no social therapy. That's it. Mother and baby unit I've worked on for a time. There is a correlation between medication and birth defects and other things like that. And so mothers will be put on medication, and the risk of harming their future child. Having to deal with suicide risks, medication is often applied, and suicide is the reasoning behind a lot of treatments, particularly the closed wards, suicide risks, medications and various things like that. And there are side effects of medications is suicidal thinking. I don't know. There's lots of contradictions with it. I don't know. I don't think it balances out. I don't think the improvements are worth the risk with the medications.
But with these elderly people, what sort of medication were they putting them on?
It'd be the full range, everything from that an adult, everything that the adult mental health patient would be given. They would often treat Alzheimer's with antipsychotics. There's no evidence that has any effect. There's no scientific backing for it. It's just a decision. It's experimentation, and I personally felt very angry and left because of this treatment. And it's only in the last couple of years that there's been some it's been publicised that it's not appropriate, that it has strong side effects. And we're aware that these drugs, it's common knowledge these drugs, cause brain damage, whether temporary or permanent. And so for Alzheimer's, I can't imagine, I think that's hideously stupid, but that's a personal opinion. Well, no, there's, depending on the ward, for closed dementia units, clients who have dementia but are still physically fit and active will be often made to sit down rather than walk around, do just even the basic exercise, and they'll be sitting down for most of the day and become increasingly crippled and in a lot of pain. I mean, not moving causes quite a great deal of pain. They end up with bed sores. They lose the ability to walk from not walking. No, it's not adequate. It's cruel.
Why were they trying to encourage them to stay sitting?
Well, because there's not many staff, and it's for management, just to manage people sitting rather than anything else. So in relation to antipsychotics, I think they have pretty strong side effects. They can have the side effects of aggression, and definitely aggression, and akathisia, which is the uncontrollable walking or uncontrollable movements, and certain levels of anxiety with it as well. And these elderly patients are being given, and I think they probably still are giving powerful antipsychotics with side effects and are unable to speak about the side effects. I don't know, the chronic tensions, having akathisia and needing to walk but not being able to walk at all, I would imagine to be quite cruel, really. But there are really powerful side effects. 7 years I've worked in mental health, I've seen a lot of them, and these people cannot respond, cannot complain about it, can't say anything, I think that's cruel.
Why can't they say anything?
Because they're suffering from severe dementia, some of them. With dementia, you saw a real degradation in their personality. They might not understand, might not be able to communicate in any way at all, might not seem to understand what's going on. Dementia ward, I would say that the essential care is given. So, the person is being kept alive, everything will be done to keep them alive. But I don't know whether they are living. And what I mean is that the environment is horrible. It's a horrible environment. It's inhuman. It isn't pleasure environments that improve our mental health. And on mental health wards, the idea is to keep them as sterile as possible, and it's under the assumption of the hermetic seal, and a hermetic seal is where you stop outside influences affecting something so that you can test what is affecting it. And that is the idea behind all of the wards, even in a dementia unit where you're testing and you're experimenting. I mean, you're not meant to experiment on humans. I mean, you're not meant to without their consent. So experimenting with the elderly with antipsychotics, they're finding nothing. All they're doing is doping people. It's a form of doping. Their environment is horrible, and they often appear to have forgotten something after you've met them. But over time, although they don't seem to remember who you are, you've developed a relationship. So I feel, positive stimulus, positive environment, lots and lots and lots of small positive things could only make a difference. And a sterile environment is bad for everyone. I think it's horrid. And they're just degrading.
No one can deny that our world is in trouble. Today our cities have become battlegrounds, often ruled by gang violence. Every 42 seconds, a violent crime is committed in the United States. Every third of a minute, someone is arrested for drug abuse. 8 million American children are prescribed drugs that cause violence and suicide. Images of murderous school children and acts of senseless violence fill the headlines. None of this just happened.
People aren't aware that in 1940, a prominent British psychiatrist, Colonel J.R. Rees, addressed the National Council on Mental Hygiene and set the agenda for psychiatry for the next 60 years. Since then, psychiatrists have been given authority in nearly every sector of our society, with tragic results.
We must aim to make it permeate every educational activity in our national life. Public life, politics, and industry should all of them be within our sphere of influence. We have made a useful attack upon a number of professions. The two easiest of them, naturally, are the teaching profession and the church. The most difficult are law and medicine.
Rees's colleague, psychiatrist G. Brock Chisholm, co-founder of the World Federation for Mental Health, expanded upon psychiatry's plans.
The reinterpretation and eventually eradication of the concept of right and wrong are the objectives of all psychotherapy. To achieve world government, it is necessary to remove from the minds of men their individualism, loyalty to family traditions, national patriotism, and religious dogmas.
To implement their master plan, American psychiatrists promised the U.S. Congress that they could solve mankind's problems, but only if they were sufficiently bankrolled. Since then, U.S. government funding for psychiatric research alone has gone from $1 million to $1.4 billion a year, an increase of more than 139,000%. And with these funds, psychiatrists accelerated their strategic plan, turning an unsuspecting public into psychiatric victims. They create imaginary diseases that are literally voted into existence and published in their billing Bible, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, or DSM.
DSM is basically an arbitrary classification of thoughts, moods, and behavior decided upon by a committee of psychiatrists, and it's created not by anything scientific. That is, it's not as if there's some study of tissue or some study of the body or some study of matter.
These invented diseases are then treated with barbaric practices and dangerous drugs that are so powerful they are classified with narcotics such as morphine, cocaine, and heroin. And even still, they are prescribed to children. The U.S. government-funded National Institutes of Health assembled a panel of prominent doctors and psychiatrists to explain to the public one of the diseases contained in the DSM: attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD.
I would like any member of the panel to describe a typical ADHD in terms of symptomatology. Mark, would you like to, since you see them in your practice?
I think the panel has been frank, and the difficulties here are immense in terms of these. It is hard. It's very hard to know how to answer this question. They cannot, even when. They are as if driven by a motive. There are some good clinical descriptions. And I think, I think the part of the problem is the profession keeps changing the diagnosis.
At this time, we do not have a diagnostic test for ADHD. Therefore, the validity of the disorder continues to be a problem.
Psychiatrists receive $21 billion a year, prescribing powerful psychotropic drugs to children for a disease that doesn't exist.
It's all a fraud. They spend millions upon millions creating this research and creating this scientific literature to convey the impression to non-scientific medical practitioners that these are brain diseases.
Psychiatrists know full well they can't prove there are any mental diseases, as they openly admitted at their annual convention in 2005.
psychiatric illness is not really an illness.
How do you evaluate if someone is cured or sick?
Cure is certainly something we look forward to. We had no earthly idea how to accomplish.
You want to treat them even if you don't really exactly know what causes it.
We're not good at causes. We don't know what causes mental illness.
But it hasn't stopped psychiatry from taking billions for treatments and drug prescriptions, while they arrogantly peddle their cures with devastating effects on unsuspecting human guinea pigs.
Mr. Blount has virtually no signs of his original illness now. The signs that the movements of his mouth are completely side effects of the drugs that he was on for 20 years. Mr. Blount is quite rational. He understands what's going on.
Psychiatric health care is big business. Insurance companies pay out $69 billion every year for psychiatric services, doubling the cost of medical insurance premiums. Psychiatry's master plan to infiltrate all sectors of society has become a reality. While psychiatrists are paid $23 billion a year to rehabilitate American prisoners, 2 out of every 3 released convicts return to prison within 3 years. In the past 40 years, money doled out to psychiatrists and psychologists to improve literacy in our schools has soared to $28 billion, while through those same 40 years, functional literacy rates have plunged. Meanwhile, posing as medical doctors, psychiatrists electroshock 2 million people a year, killing 10,000. For $12 worth of electricity, American psychiatrists rake in $5 billion a year. With all their so-called miracle treatments, nearly twice as many Americans have died in government psychiatric hospitals in just the past 4 decades than in all U.S. wars since 1776. So any way you measure it, psychiatry has spelled nothing but ruin. While raking in over $2 trillion every year, they cannot point to a single cure. As unbelievable as all this may seem to you, you are about to learn the facts about psychiatry that psychiatrists would prefer you didn't know. It is because of their influence that society is failing. Something can and must be done about it.
Founded in 1969 by the Church of Scientology, the Citizens Commission on Human Rights investigates and exposes psychiatric violations of human rights. From its international headquarters in Los Angeles, California, CCHR documents psychiatry's invasive and destructive practices and publishes its findings, making them available in some 15 languages. More than 12 million copies have been distributed to healthcare professionals, government officials, educators, and business leaders world over. The headquarters is also the site of the world-renowned exhibit, Psychiatry, an Industry of Death. Centered around 14 documentary films, this state-of-the-art exhibition presents the history of psychiatry, from its origins, where the mentally ill were caged like animals, to the present-day mass drugging of society as the cure for invented mental disorders. Traveling versions of the exhibit visit hundreds of cities across 5 continents, opening the way for hundreds of thousands to discover for themselves the dark truth behind psychiatry. What is today a global human rights movement began more than 30 years ago with a fight for the freedom of one individual, Victor Ghiori, forcibly committed to a Pennsylvania psychiatric hospital.
He was interviewed by a psychiatrist who said, "I can't understand a word this man is saying. He's incoherent. Obviously a paranoid schizophrenic. Commit him," which they did. Now, he wasn't babbling incoherently, he was speaking Hungarian. We filed a lawsuit against the hospital.
In the middle of the case, the doctor, who was the head of the hospital, stands up and he says, "We want nothing more to do with Victor Giori."
The release of Victor Giori was the first of thousands of cases throughout the world helped by CCHR.
CCHR challenged involuntary commitment laws throughout the United States and internationally, and what we found was that people were being incarcerated without any legal rights.
They had no right to an attorney. They could be drugged, shocked, lobotomized without their consent.
Example, Australia, 1977, where CCHR exposed a psychiatric practice called deep sleep treatment.
Patients were being knocked unconscious with a cocktail of barbiturates and other psychiatric drugs, and they were being subjected to electroshock treatment daily, sometimes twice daily, without their knowledge. Deep sleep treatment had led to 48 deaths.
It was CCHR that investigated it, exposed it, and fought for over a decade until deep sleep treatment was banned. In South Africa, CCHR exposed psychiatric camps where mental patients were kept and brutalized and then farmed out as slave labor. In Italy, CCHR worked with legislators and the media, conducting raids on psychiatric hospitals, the conditions of which were barbaric, and CCHR got them shut down. In Japan, CCHR exposed the financial crimes of psychiatrists and hospitals that were defrauding the government and taxpayers. The guilty were tried and the hospitals put out of business. And in the United States, CCHR uncovered a billion-dollar fraud in the nation's largest chain of private mental health facilities. 600 federal agents conducted raids across 20 states. Dozens of prosecutions ensued. Millions of dollars in fines imposed, and the entire chain of corrupt hospitals was permanently closed. And behind many public warnings you see today about psychiatric drugs is CCHR.
CCHR has documented the side effects of these drugs, has taken evidence to the FDA, has gone to Congress, has obtained congressional hearings.
It took 13 years before the FDA finally admitted that those drugs can cause suicide and issued black box warnings. We got 9 state laws passed. Following that, it was the introduction of the Child Medication Safety Act in 2004.
Over a 3-year period, due to the efforts of CCHR and others, there have been more than 60 government warnings exposing the dangers of psychiatric drugs.
People do have problems in life. Sometimes they can be very serious. But the last thing you want to do is hurt them, and that's what psychiatric treatment does. There are alternatives. There are treatments and methods that will actually help people without the violence of drugs and electroshock. And they're economical as well. And that is a threat to a vested interest that is making billions of dollars from psychiatric drugs every year.
History has shown that virtually every workable treatment, every one that has been available for the seriously mentally disturbed, people who actually need help, has been suppressed or shut down by the vested interests of psychiatry and the pharmaceutical industry.
The public's largely been getting their information from the industry that benefits on putting them on psychiatric drugs. It's an advertising campaign. It's not science, it's marketing.
CCHR is causing things to change by being champions for a growing number of well-intentioned people who are risking their professional careers to speak up against the abuses of psychiatry.
Having that support from a group like this has made a tremendous difference in what I feel personally that I've been able to accomplish.
I think of CCHR as fellow soldiers.
I'm unaware of any other organization that does the kind of work that CCHR does, particularly on the scope and the level that they do.
CCHR has been very effective at moving the ball down the field. One at a time, one state at a time, one legislator at a time.
CCHR has had the resources to be able to teach and have legislators become more aware of what the problem with the psychotropic drugs are.
CCHR has researched the issue. When you need the facts, you go to CCHR.
Today, CCHR has over 250 chapters in dozens of countries around the world. Wherever and whenever psychiatrists abuse human rights, CCHR takes its message to the streets. From the United States to Japan, and from Canada to the United Kingdom, prominent members of CCHR lead marches to secure the protection and freedom from psychiatric abuse for everyone.
It's essential that CCHR
does their job and gets the support to do their job. Because the extent to which they do, the whole vehicle that's out of control about psychiatry gets to be contained and gets to be eliminated. It scares me to think if this doesn't happen. I've seen up close what it's like, and it scares the daylights out of me.
You have 100,000 people electroshocked every year. You have 17 million children worldwide taking mind-altering drugs. You have people being involuntarily committed every 75 seconds, and it's all under the guise of mental health.
The only way that you are going to get humane treatment into the mental health system is to take psychiatry and the vested interests out of the picture. And only then will you see people truly obtaining mental health.
You have two choices. Either you pretend you knew nothing about it, or you do something about it. With knowledge comes responsibility. That's why we're here. That's why people are joining forces with CCHR.
Thousands from every faith and walk of life have already joined. CCHR investigates and exposes psychiatric violations of human rights, and will continue to do so until psychiatry's abusive and coercive practices cease and human rights and dignity are returned to all. Your help is needed. Join us in the fight.
You are not coming in this house. You are not coming. You are blocking this door. You are not coming in. This is absolute police abuse.
You can film it as much as you like.
This is police abuse.
We can show you the warrant if you like.
This is police abuse. How has a warrant been obtained? How has a warrant been obtained?
You have to ask them.
Let me see the warrant. Out. Out.
Got a picture of it.
This is ridiculous. Absolutely. Let me go and get a letter. You stay there. You are not coming in this house. You are not coming. You are blocking this door. You are not coming in. This is absolute police abuse.
You can film it as much as you like.
This is police abuse.
We can show you the warrant if you like.
This is police abuse. How has a warrant been obtained? How has a warrant been obtained?
You have to ask them.
Let me see the warrant. Out. Out.
Got a picture of it.
This is ridiculous. Absolutely. Let me go and get a letter. You stay there.